Last week, President Biden announced that he would withdraw all U.S. troops from Afghanistan by the 20th anniversary of 9/11 this fall. That does put Biden a few months behind the Trump administration's initial withdrawal date, which was set for May.
So President and founder of the Center for Study of Partisanship and Ideology, research fellow at the Defense Priorities, Richard Hanania, joins us to discuss the new deadline, some of the opponents to all of this. Richard, it's good to see you. You have been tracking this issue for quite a long time. Now, last time we had you on, I believe, it was to talk about all of the people making the case for staying today in Afghanistan said the exact same thing a decade ago. So in your view, who are going to be the most vociferous opponents to this? And if Biden does face any obstacles, what are they going to look like here in Washington?
So the most angry people have been, I mean, it's changed because it seems like the anti-interventionist, the restraint crowd has made some headway. So when you read the New York Times, there's a little more skeptical of the leaks that the generals give them. But something like the Washington Post Op-Ed page is very angry. So the Washington Post within a day or two ran 4 Op-Eds by my count, saying what a terrible mistake this was. So within Washington, I think it's coming from Republicans, but Biden is lucky because Republicans don't control either house of Congress. But people sort of got the impression that Republicans were against the Afghan war. That was only really Trump and a few pro-Trump media figures. Most of the Republican Party has been pretty angry about this, but they don't, like I said, they don't control either house of Congress. The Democratic leadership has been generally supportive. That includes Schumer, that includes Pelosi, that includes the more famous liberal members of Congress, including Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders. They said enough is enough. So the fact that I think the Republicans losing the Senate, not taking the House, and then the fact that the anti-interventionist crowd has made a lot of inroads in Washington and in the press, I don't think there's going to be a lot of opposition. I think the opposition was before the decision was made. And I think with Trump, the decision and every foreign policy decision was sort of always up to negotiations because people always had this idea that he might change his mind at a later date. But Biden has surrounded himself with serious professional people. So I think, they've accepted defeat here, and I don't think there's going to be a lot of opposition in Washington.
That's very interesting. I was wondering what you made of this piece in the Wall Street Journal. The headline is Biden rebuffed commander's advice and decision to leave Afghanistan. They got a bunch of quotes from people at the Pentagon. The lead graph says President Biden's decision to remove all U.S. troops from Afghanistan ran counter to the recommendations of his top military commanders who feared it could undermine security in the country. My response when I see that, I say, good, he overruled the Pentagon. That's actually good. But I think most people reading the story would be concerned, like, oh, he's not listening to the advice of the people who know the most, who have been on the ground, who've been involved in this effort for a long time. What did you make of this story? And there have been a couple others insisting that, it was the civilians who came in or really running the Pentagon, and they're just ignoring the generals on this.
Yeah, overrule. They keep using the word in the press, overrule, which is a strange word to use because he's the civilian.
Yeah.
Military. Exactly. So it's his decision to make. But look, the generals, they have a lot of political capital. And so there's a lot of things they can do when they oppose what a president's trying to do. So they can leak to the press. They can enlist sympathetic journalists, sympathetic members of Congress. They testify before Congress and they give their opinion. And the generals throughout the Afghanistan war have always been on the side of let's keep fighting. And so this was just a huge fight during the Obama administration. I mean, you read Obama's memoirs or Ben Rhodes's memoirs, and the frustration is palpable. I mean, they really, really felt boxed in. There was Republican Congress at the time, and Obama ended up going, with a surge, which led to a lot more deaths. And so the generals were wrong. I mean, we can say that because a lot more people died, and the U.S. didn't stabilize Afghanistan, and we're still there 10 years later. So yeah, I mean, this is a indication that the system is working like it's supposed to work. I mean, the last president, there was I think the generals found it a lot easier to sort of get their way because there was a lot less professionalism at the top, a lot less sort of attention span bandwidth to do things and stick with them. But Biden, wasn't going to let that happen, and he was there during the Obama debate. He was telling Obama, don't let the generals box you in. I see what they're doing, and it seems like he took that lesson to heart and made sure it wouldn't happen this time.
So that's my final question here for you, Richard, which is that what does it say about Trump and Obama that neither of them were able to do this? Now, look, devil's in the details, all of this. But once you say this is not conditions-based withdrawal, it's real hard to back away from something like that, and I would be surprised if they were able to do so. So what does it say, really, about what it actually takes to stand up to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and say, not only am I not going to do what you want, I'm going to do the opposite?
Yeah, I mean, every president came in with different political constraints. So like I said, Obama, it was closer to 9/11. People still had more of an idea that these places actually mattered to U.S. security. He had just appointed a new general to lead in Afghanistan, and he was sort of seen as a not very experienced politician with the military affairs. So they had a lot of leverage over him. So it's hard to compare. Trump came in, I think his inabilities to do much early on was sort of more self-inflicted because he hired all these people who didn't really agree with him. But that being said, individual leadership does matter. I think Biden is a good politician. I think Biden realizes, and Obama or Trump could have realized this early in their term, that basically when the U.S. leaves Afghanistan, it might get a bad headline. I mean, if things really, really go south, I mean, the president could look bad for a little while, but people's attention spans are generally short. And so if Biden is gone by September 11th, that's a year before the next midterm elections. That's 3 years before the next presidential elections. I think the only political danger for Biden would be the U.S. was still taking casualties again. He runs for re-election. The guy who's running against could very well be Trump, who says, I signed this agreement to get out May 1st, and now all these dead Americans are losing their lives. The Americans are losing their lives because you decided to stay. I think that would have been a signature issue for Trump. So that's what I think. That's what I think Biden was thinking. He was thinking politically, I think, but he was also he's also just shown a history of being skeptical of these Middle East interventions. So he wanted to get out of Iraq pretty early, a few years after the war. He wanted to break up the country. He was the one, as mentioned, in the Obama administration who didn't want a surge. He was against the Libya intervention, against Hillary Clinton and Susan Rice and some others. So people have this idea that he's sleepy and sort of out to lunch. No, there seems to be a consistency and there seems to be an effectiveness in what he's doing, at least on this issue.
Let me ask you a little bit more of that as the last question. I mean, do you see a sort of Biden doctrine taking shape? Because his foreign policy record when he was in the Senate and, was for a while chair of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee is spotty. I mean, he did help build the case for the war in Iraq, but then under the Obama administration, he was more on the other side of the ledger. So I know it's early days, but do you see any sort of a Biden doctrine towards foreign policy coalescing here?
Yeah, it's early. It's hard to say. I think what I just mentioned as skeptical of Middle East ground wars, I think that's part of the Biden doctrine. Most other things, I think, are still up in the air. He seems to be going very hard on Russia. He seems to go somewhat hard on China. And so he's a big believer in, the alliance, the transatlantic alliance system. So there's no, he's not a restrainer across the board. He's not a person who's saying we're going to pull back from all interventions abroad. But, the most destructive things in American foreign policy in the last 20 years have been these Middle East ground wars and these social engineering projects. And at the very least, if we can say nothing else about Biden, I think we're not going to be doing that anymore.
Yeah, well,
that's a very good thing.
One can only hope. Thank you, Richard.
Great to see you, Richard. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yep.
Coming up, author Jonathan Cohn discusses his new book, The 10-Year War, Obamacare, and the Unfinished Crusade for Universal Coverage when Rising returns.